So in this sprint review, I'm going to walk through the 3 user stories that we tackled in this sprint and talk about the different acceptance criteria associated with them. So we had 3 user stories, like I said, and they all centered around creating a community page that would allow volunteers to log distributed food and recovered food records. The first user story was a non-functional user story, and there's nothing really concrete to show for this. This was just the team taking time to learn how community pages work and also do some independent research associated with their specific task. We just felt that this was such a complicated component of the system that we wanted to set aside a entire user story for each person to take time to do research, or else it would have made the actual community page stories too complex to do on their own. So that user story, like I said, basically the acceptance criteria was that everybody's had enough knowledge to complete their tasks, and we all did. So that was met. That was complete. Our next 2 user stories were, the first was allowing a volunteer to create a recovered food entry via community page and a distributed food entity via community page. And those 2 user stories both had very similar sets of acceptance criteria. So I'm going to talk through the recovered foods, and then I'll just demonstrate how distributed foods is similar. So both user stories involved a community page, and the first acceptance criteria was that volunteers needed to be able to access this community page without a Salesforce login. So I'm going to open an incognito window because I'm not logged into Salesforce in this incognito window. And I'm going to go ahead and open up the community page that we have created. So as you can see, they don't need to log in. If they pull up this link, it just lets them access it. And there's just this one screen. We have some, one of the acceptance criteria was that there is CKUGA branding on the community page just so that it fits with the rest of their online presence. So as you can see, we have some logo here, and then we have their logo across the top as well. So that was the other piece of acceptance criteria for this. The other big piece of acceptance criteria for this was that we wanted to make sure they didn't have access to any information other than creating distributed food and recovered food entities. So as you can see, this is technically a record list, and while it's not very pretty to just have this no items to display here, this is here because we don't want them to see any of these previous recovered food or distributed food entities. So it's not super pretty, but it is a lot more secure because we're not revealing any information to the volunteers that we don't want them to have. As you can see also, the only thing they're able to do from this screen is to add a new recovered food or a new distributed food entity. They're not able to see anything about the donors. They're not able to add or edit donors or clients or client interactions. The only entities that they're able to access are the recovered food and the distributed food entities, which was another big acceptance criteria for this. So all they have to do when they want to enter a new, let's say we'll start with the recovered food entity, is they'd select new next to recovered food, and it pulls up this form. They'll just enter in the date. So today is the 29th. Now, this part is not as ideal, but there's not really a way around it. This is just a feature of Salesforce. Because this is a lookup column, this doesn't show up as a pick list. It shows up as a search bar, so they actually have to search the name of the donor and then select it. Obviously, we want them to be able to see all of the donors, but that's just not possible given Salesforce. So other donor name is there to be filled out if the donor name is other. And I demonstrated this functionality in the last sprint review, but I will just go ahead and demonstrate it again. We have some validation rules established here where this field cannot be filled out unless the donor name is other. So we'll just pretend the volunteer got confused and tried to fill out food bank, and then they'll select the food type, which is beverages, and then we'll say 10 pounds. And they can either click save, or let's say if they click save, it will take them, well, first it'll show this error. Looks like we have an invalid date here. We have to select the full date. Now if I try to save it, there should still be an error. Yeah. So please leave this field blank or select other as donor name. So this is, again, this validation rule that we established before, that this field has to be filled out if the donor name is other and cannot be filled out if the donor name is not other. So just to demonstrate, again, if they selected other as the donor name, then they forgot to fill this out if they tried to save this. Again, they get an error. Please enter the name of the other donor or select a donor name from the provided list. So we'll just say individual. Now this should go ahead and create the recovered food entry, and they'll be able to see that it has been created. Now there's an even better way to do this if they had multiple entries at once to edit, and I'll demonstrate on this distributed food. If they want to add a new distributed food entity, it's, again, essentially identical, all the same fields besides food type. They'd go ahead and type in the date. We have the same validation rules set up for destination name. So I'll demonstrate that by filling this out. We'll say 10 pounds. So if I just click save and new, well, I'm going to get an error. Please leave this field blank or select other as the destination name. So I'll just leave this field blank. Now if I click save and new, it's created, and then the form just pops up right away again. This will be really helpful because oftentimes volunteers will have multiple entries to fill in at once, and by just clicking save and new, that saves them from having to go in and click the button again and again. They could just add in a new entry here right away from this screen. Just say individual, make it 10 pounds. Save it. And there we go. And they could do this over and over and over again. So this has met all the acceptance criteria for both of the user stories, because they're able to create a new record for recovered food and a new record from distributed food from the home page. They don't have to click around to find that button. It's just right here on the home page. And then also the other big acceptance criteria here was making sure that those validation rules associated with donor and destination carried over to the community page. And as I demonstrated, they have done that. So with all of that said, all of that acceptance criteria for those two different user stories related to recovered food and distributed food have been met, and we have accomplished all of the user stories that we set out to accomplish for this sprint. For this sprint, our main goal was to just communicate a little bit better, because the complexity of this project has really been increasing and tasks are becoming increasingly dependent on one another. And while everyone has done a good job of completing their tasks by the specified due date, they've not done a good job of letting their team members know when that task is complete. And that has delayed the start of other tasks, because if task B is dependent on task A and the person responsible for task B doesn't know task A is complete, they can't start task A. So our goal for this sprint was really to just make sure people were very transparent about when they completed a task, so that everyone was ready to complete dependent tasks as soon as possible. Unfortunately, we don't really feel like we did a good job of that this sprint. While we did accomplish all of the tasks, it was a little bit of a last-minute rush to get it all done. And so we have kind of set that as our task for the next sprint as well, is just to try to improve this communication using both our GroupMe that we have set up as well as the Kanban board that we have created. So that is a goal that is going to carry over into our next sprint as well. And we are hoping that we'll be able to improve upon that as we move forward. Thank you.